The story begins 5 years ago when those who were awakened to supernatural abilities appeared and made the world change drastically. Subsequently, mixed martial arts split into 2 distinct categories: the Abilities User League or DK and the Non-Abilities User League or MMA. And now, our main protagonist, Si-yeon, has a goal, which is to reinvigorate this fading non-abilities league despite the league's significant debt. For her, it's foolish to hand over the leadership so easily, and she wondered why people don't understand the undervaluation of mixed martial arts. She also concluded that this sport is underappreciated, representing the perfect opportunity for success. If she succeeds in revitalizing the league, she believes that it's a surefire way to raking up a lot of money. Her task is straightforward for a non-ability person like her to succeed. She believes that all she needs to do is to lift the guy's permanent ban. The guy she was referring to was the one who was able to easily defeat someone bolder than him. Si-yeon always watched this guy's battle, and now that he was banned, she was planning to put her to good use. This guy was indeed overpowered and was enjoying fighting against his opponent without any feeling of guilt in him. He is Hwang Kwang-ho, an MMA champion with a professional record of 49 wins and 1 loss. But there's a reason why he's permanently banned. It is because of his provocative behavior and taunts, his dirty fighting style, and also because of a certain incident. But for Si-yeon, Kwang-ho was crucial because during his time in the league, all indicators had hit their peak. Others might not know, but she does. She was sure that Kwang-ho was pulling all the stunts deliberately for publicity. For her, Kwang-ho is a genius with a God-given talent for attracting attention. However, she was so disappointed when she hired Kwang-ho. Kwang-ho was always on his phone, lying down and not even doing any training. He's been like this since his comeback fight. "What are you doing?" Si-yeon asked. Kwang-ho glanced at her and got up, then reasoned out that he was conditioning himself. Si-yeon wants to curse at him since she mainly brought Kwang-ho back on the condition of helping in the ratings. Kwang-ho understood that her main goal was to boost the ratings. He stood and gripped Si-yeon's shoulder and let her show his phone. "What do you think about a plan like this?" she asked. He was currently referring to the #1 popular post on social media. It's about McGregor versus 500 grandmothers. Si-yeon was reading it, but became furious after. She said that the post was so trashy, but for Kwang-ho, it was so funny. His tears of joy even dropped while trying to stop his laugh. Si-yeon at the same time was thinking about this big issue, and believing that the people are now calling McGregor trash. After all, even if he continues fighting as hard as he is now, who would bother watching, right? Kwang-ho said. But for Si-yeon, if they would pull a stunt like the news, it could ruin the entire league. Kwang-ho senses that Si-yeon dislikes the idea, so he suggests her to try reading some other posts, knowing that it's the biggest platform in their country. Si-yeon concludes that Kwang-ho might think that bigger is always better, but she believes that the more bigger it is, the more trash there is. Look here, starting from the title of the most recommended post, if a pro with no special abilities fought an amateur with abilities, who would win? And for her, it is just a weird post. She doesn't have any idea who's gonna win if a person who made a nuclear punch with pure fists 30 years ago and an amateur with abilities who's been training for 2 years fights. The post they were currently reading reached 476 views and has 425 comments. Most of the comments were majorities. Some think that the pro would win, and some also believe that it would be the amateur. Si-yeon concludes that a plan that both the abilities and a non-abilities user would be interested in. She was wondering if this would be possible. Kwang-ho was still looking at his phone, not until he saw Si-yeon come out from the door. She then told him that she was going to scout an ability user. "If you're going, let's eat first. I'm hungry." Kwang-ho replied, but Si-yeon shouted at him, commanding him to stop the nonsense and follow her as she needed to secure her plan quickly. Meanwhile, they arrived at the gym and asked the head about Si-yeon's plan, but unfortunately, the head said it wasn't possible. Si-yeon concludes that the head doesn't like the terms of the contract, so she offers to give him a portion of the match's profit, but the head says that it is not just about money. He pointed to his men and explained that when they awaken their abilities, their physical abilities are somewhat enhanced. Hence, there's no problem, but those without the abilities could get seriously hurt if they hit them. For him, it's better if they would avoid causing harm to people just to make some money. All of a sudden, Kwang Ho yawned so loud and said, "Gathering a bunch of amateurs who can't even fight properly, and they're starting to act tough." The head then saw him and asked Si-yeon about his identity. Si-yeon then told the head that Kwang Ho was a non-ability pro fighter who will be participating in her plan. She then pleased Kwang Ho to quiet down, knowing that she and the head were in the middle of an important discussion. The head was staring at Kwang Ho, but it seemed like Kwang Ho misunderstood it and asked the head why he was staring at him for so long. Si-yeon smiled at him, but deep inside her, she was annoyed and wanted Kwang Ho to stop insulting the head. "Even if you provoke me, nothing will change. Abilities were originally bestowed for the greater good of people," the head stated. Kwang Ho stood and said, "Originally, chatty guys like you know nothing but shit. Scared? Afraid of getting beaten up?" The head didn't like Kwang Ho's attitude, but he calmly ordered them to just leave. Si-yeon and Kwang left without any words. While walking, Kwang Ho wondered why the head wasn't retaliating. Si-yeon then informed him that the head already said that he wouldn't do it because he was afraid of hurting someone. She believes that they could possibly persuade the head if they could have addressed this issue, and she blamed Kwang Ho for getting in the way. "What? Don't tell me you're actually buying what these ability user guys are saying? That guy probably thinks of us as bugs beneath him," Kwang Ho replied. He was punching the air while telling Si-yeon that he had to agitate those people slowly like how he punches the air now, so their true nature would come out and they would start fighting. Si-yeon continued walking while telling to stop blabbering and just go back. She also informed Kwang Ho that she would like to scout on her own. She feels annoyed the moment she hears Kwang Ho becomes excited that she let him leave early. "I thought that bastard was a genius," she uttered with annoyance. Kwang Ho spoke informally to her, asking her if he could really go. But then Si-yeon didn't respond and just continued walking away until she was out of sight of Kwang Ho. Kwang Ho then turned around and uttered that Si-yeon was such a naive girl. Going back to the gym, the head of the artists cleaned up and one of his men asked what he was doing. He then answered that he only cleaned the entrance as it got a bit dirty. Meanwhile, Si-yeon drinks a soda and rests for a bit. She spent lots of hours, but there's still no one who wants to participate in her plan. She checked her phone and found out that it was already 10:54 in the evening. She decides to call it a day, but then she stares at the man in her wallpaper and becomes so silent. In the end, she stood and decided to try one more time. She headed to the gym, believing that that place was so somewhat receptive. She concludes that the head might participate if she tries to persuade him one more time. When she arrives, she sees no one. "Is anybody here? I'm the person who came with a planned proposal this morning. Could you spare some time to talk once more?" she asked. But no one is responding. She was looking around with the box of meals in her hand. She kept on calling someone without knowing that the head was already behind him and was already annoyed that she had come back. This time, the head had 6 arms and used one of them to push Si-yeon away, causing her to let go of the meal and cough. The head strangled her while saying that he just cleaned up while Si-yeon still dared to come back. She then threw Si-yeon on the ground and Si-yeon was in pain and was dumbfounded to see the man's 4 arms. "Perhaps, are you reacting this way because of what happened this morning?" she asked, but the head wasn't responding. Si-yeon was stuttering while asking the man to calm down. She also apologizes to him, but the head replies that he doesn't care about such a thing. He attacked Si-yeon, but Si-yeon was surprised to see Kwang Ho came and interfered. "I knew this bastard would pull something like this," Kwang Ho said and smirked. The head stared at him and charged. He tried to punch Kwang Ho but easily dodged it. Still, he continued to attack Kwang Ho, and Kwang managed to avoid his 6 arms. Kwang Ho then jumped and kicked the head's face. The head used his arms to cover his face, and he was now furious at Kwang Ho. "Because you were scared of that bug, that's why you were venting your anger behind that bug's back," Kwang Ho said, and the head angrily charged at him and tried to punch him multiple times. Kwang Ho blocked the head's arms, and at the same time, Si-yeon was very invested in the match, as it was her first time seeing someone with the ability to fight who is a boxer with 6 arms. It was originally her plan. A plan to fight against such a guy, and she couldn't believe she could pull this off. The head still punches Kwang Ho, but Kwang Ho even has a chance to pass through his arms and teases him for having 6 useless arms. He then punched his opponent's face, not just once but several times. Kwang Ho was enjoying it, and the head didn't have a chance to fight back. "You have to hit it like this," Kwang Ho said while punching his opponent so hard. The head was bleeding and angrily screamed, "Who's teaching who?" Well, though it still has its advantages. Like this, there are many places to catch, Kwang Ho stated while squeezing the head's one arm. Si-yeon was speechless witnessing the battle. On the other hand, the head was kneeling on the ground and screamed in agony. Kwang Ho was standing in front of him with an evil smile which caused him to get insulted and force himself to stand. He tried to punch Kwang Ho once more, but Kwang Ho was so calm and easily caught his hand, then rotated it. His opponent's bones got broken. He counted from 5 down to 4 and was able to crack his opponent's numerous bones. "You worthless, insignificant bug," the head screamed and lay down on the ground. "If I'm a bug, then are you a worm?" Kwang Ho replied, then punched the head's face for the last time. He then stood and looked at Si-yeon and reminded the lady that he already told her these kinds of people don't even see them as humans. Si-yeon was speechless. All she said was thank you to Kwang Ho. Kwang Ho puts his hands on his waist, then Si-yeon tells him that they should now scrap the plan. Kwang Ho was confused. Si-yeon then explains that if all these abilities users abide by these rules, it might have been impossible for them to cooperate from the start. She sighed and wanted to explain it further, but then Kwang Ho asked about why they needed to cooperate. He gets something on the corner, which is a phone. It turned out that he broadcasted his fight against an ability user. He told Si-yeon that ability users would come, flocking to them on their own by just making them angry. Si-yeon was speechless while staring at the phone Kwang Ho was holding. Lots of comments on the live. Kwang Ho also informed her that he made a promotion on the post earlier. He handed the phone to Si-yeon while adding that the more people watching the live show, the easier it is to prove that what he did was self-defense. He also believes that this would also be good for fostering cooperation. "Oi, all you ability user dickheads hiding behind your screens, seems like your true colors are all out. What you gonna do now? You enjoyed wreaking havoc with the power you locked into, didn't you? But what now? I'm stronger than you even without all that shit," he said while facing his face on his camera. Si-yeon tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He even challenged the other ability users to fight him, and was confident enough to say that he would accept anyone. He said that if no one came, he would be the one to come. Lots of people watching him, including superior ability users. The show reached 113,000 viewers, and Kwang Ho said to the live audience, "You don't need to be scared since I won't be practicing any." Si-yeon didn't deny that she brought Kwang Ho in to save their failing league, but now she wasn't sure if she made the right decision. Kwang Ho's provocation spread like wildfire. Some of the commenters were so negative toward him, but there are also some who were on his side as they have experienced from the ability users being belittled just because they don't have an ability. The news about former champion Kwang Ho taunts, "Come at me." This kind of provocation wouldn't normally cause such of a stir. After what happened, Si-yeon normally hears people gossiping about Kwang Ho. While she was heading home, there was a man behind him who said that Kwang Ho really knew how to draw attention and knew how to pull people in. They were wondering what would happen to Kwang Ho once he lost, but they also concluded that Kwang Ho challenged the ability users as he had the confidence to win. Si-yeon was so tired of listening to people knowing that she was the one who brought Kwang Ho in. At this moment, the people behind her feel like everyone is staring at them. Si-yeon was annoyed knowing that it was because of her. The people in front of them were capturing her since they remembered that she was the lady in the live video of Kwang Ho. In addition, her face was on the huge screen since there was news that she, the president of Kwang Ho, was caught up in the controversy. Provocation, the superiority complex of the ability user, and the sense of injustice felt by those non-ability users ended up sparking a fire. Si-yeon covered her face with her small bag since flashes of cameras flashed to her face. She was sweating and blamed Kwang Ho for this. Meanwhile, Kwang Ho was so bored. He was in their office, and he could not go out since it was still too chaotic outside their building. Up until this point, she was still waiting for someone who would dare to fight him. Si-yeon was with him and was feeling down because of what happened earlier. He suddenly smiled and guffawed, so Kwang Ho thought that she had some good news to say. Si-yeon looked at him and stomped her foot on the table, then said that she really had good news. That is, Kwang Ho would be banned again permanently from today onward. "Where have your honorifics gone? Why have you been speaking informally since the last time?" she asked. "I'm going to be expelled anyway." "What's the use of honorifics?" Kwang Ho replied. At this moment, he can see that Si-yeon is slightly panicked. He hung his arm on Si-yeon's shoulder and told her that she was now in the same boat as him. While saying this, he grabbed the phone from Si-yeon's pockets. He also told the lady that no one would believe her no matter how many times she says that she has nothing to do with Kwang Ho. He then walked away while Si-yeon asked him if he saved her in the first place for this purpose. Kwang Ho then said it doesn't matter and that the most important thing is that they are together on this issue now. Si-yeon was looking at him, believing that Kwang Ho wasn't wrong at all. She knows that there's no way for the people to believe that she has nothing to do with the issue in this current situation. In this case, there is one thing she can do. She clenched her fists and called Kwang Ho's name and said, "This provocation, the bigger the issue, the greater the risk. If you lose the first match, all this attention will morph into criticism." Her main goal now is to figure out what Kwang Ho is really planning. She then asked him if he had a surefire way to win against professional ability users. She believes that Kwang Ho wouldn't have stirred up this mess without a sure plan. But then, Kwang Ho answered that she didn't have any plans at all. Si-yeon was so upset since this is not the answer she expected. "Why do I need a plan? I just need to win," Kwang Ho said. "The guy whom you fought last time was just an amateur. How are you planning to win against pros who are in a different league?" Si-yeon asked. As per Kwang Ho, the man in the gym he beat up is not just an amateur but a pro. While talking, he ordered food online and handed back the phone to Si-yeon, asking her if she didn't investigate the man. He also said that he doesn't know why Si-yeon thinks he's going to lose. Si-yeon was staring at him with an angry face, and he confidently said he won't ever lose. Si-yeon gets his phone and remains speechless. After a few seconds, she asked Kwang Ho who he thought he'd be fighting. Kwang Ho then answered that it doesn't matter who it is, considering there's no one who issued a challenge so far. For him, those people are a bunch of cowards for not accepting his challenge. All of a sudden, they heard a loud noise and Si-yeon saw someone attacking their office. This man seemed to have a strong power for being able to destroy the wall. "Who are you calling a coward?" the man asked to Kwang Ho. He walked toward Kwang Ho and he was so tall. Kwang Ho looked at him with no emotion and didn't even feel scared. This tall, bald man calls Kwang Ho a shrimp. His assistant then came and reminded him to just open the door to come in. And the tall, bald man then admitted that he forgot it again. This time, Kwang Ho asked who he was, and he answered that he was someone who wasn't a coward. Si-yeon was nervous thinking that this man was an ability user who accepted Kwang Ho's challenge. "Good, shall we get started right away?" Kwang Ho said while cracking his wrist. But then the bald man refused and said that he didn't come to fight today. Instead, he came to have a conversation. What conversation? You don't want to fight? Kwang Ho asked while getting booger in his nose. No. If we will fight, it should be at the pro arena. I'm also itching for a fight, you know. The bald man replied. He said that before they could have a match, Kwang Ho should hit his jaw once. Kwang Ho didn't respond. They were so silent not until Si-yeon talked, reminding Kwang Ho how he said earlier that they were in the same boat. Since he said that, Si-yeon wants them both to work together. She stopped Kwang Ho since she was expecting that Kwang Soo could not hit the bald man's jaw. Kwang Soo smiled and concluded that Si-yeon was only worried that he might fall for such a provocation. Si-yeon was silent for a moment, then admitted that Kwang Ho was right, that she was only afraid that Kwang Ho would only fall for such a provocation again. But then Kwang Ho didn't listen at all. He moved his hand towards the bald man while asking Si-yeon why she always gives him an order. Si-yeon was shocked to see Kwang Ho bravely grab the man's collar and said that he felt an overwhelming urge to do the exact opposite when someone ordered him. When told to hit, he feels like hitting. And when asked to hit once, he feels like hitting damn hard. He swung his other arm and hit the bald man's cheek while asking Si-yeon that there must be no more orders coming from her. The bald man was holding his arm and smiled, then asked him if he was done yammering. Good, I like you, he uttered and challenged Kwang Ho to have a fight against him in 10 days. I like that it's not an order. You seem to learn quickly, Dancha, Kwang Ho said. And the bald man replied, Of course, I'm quite sharp, you know. And he also assumed that Kwang Ho accepted his challenge. His assistant then prepared a contract and said that they should now proceed with the match contract. She explains that though their side DK will oversee the match with a non-ability user is unprecedented, so it would be conducted as an exhibition match, not an official one. Kwang Ho read the contract and handed it over to Si-yeon while admitting that he's not good with stuff like the contract. Si-yeon was annoyed but still accepted the contract and read it. She was shocked and whispered to Kwang Ho that the contract terms were incredibly favorable to them. She believes that there must be a reason why these people are offering them these terms, so she warned Kwang Ho to be cautious. But then they heard the bald man asking Kwang Ho if who else he could fight with, if it was not them, since no one had even approached Kwang Ho with a match proposal. Kwang Ho stares at the bald man and the lady and says, So it was you guys who did this? He then got the pen and signed the contract. He then threw the contract to the bald man while accusing them of playing dirty tricks from the very start. The bald man caught the contract and Kwang Ho then said that he accepted the bald man's challenge. Don't get too complacent just because you're young, okay? The bald man said. Kwang Ho then said that this bald man is a bit cheeky. At the same time, Si-yeon was holding him to stop him from attacking. The bald man then said that he must leave now that they had finished with the contract and told Kwang Ho that they would continue their conversation at the arena. Kwang Ho then grabbed Si-yeon's hand and twisted it while telling the bald man to use the door to leave. The bald man then waved goodbye at him and promised to always remember to use the door all the time. He touched the door and tried to open it by squeezing it, causing the door to be destroyed. He then left while Kwang Ho was staring at the damage in their office. The assistant of the bald man then told Kwang Ho to contact them for compensation. Si-yeon was panting and Kwang Ho then looked at him and said that it felt rewarding after all that promotion because of a DK League match right off the bat. He was smiling at the lady, but the lady didn't agree with what he was saying. On the other hand, the bald man was heading home. He was inside his car and his assistant informed him that they had received 27 claims for damages in just 1 month, and she asked her boss about what they should do with all the damages. Since today is a good day, let's not get hung up on the minor details. The bald man replied, and he was now wearing a black cloth. In the DK League, the fighters are assigned colors based on their rankings. Among them, black is the highest color. and the privilege has been granted only to 3 fighters. This bald man is Paul Ronne, referred to as Terminus. The reason he's referred to as Terminus is quite simple. That is because all the fighters who have faced him in the matches have always ended up in the Terminus. At this moment, Si-yeon was watching one of Paul's matches and found out how strong he was. She also discovered that Paul Ronne is a top-level fighter. She knows that they have been tricked, but the contract terms weren't the important part for her. What she believes is that Hwang Kwang-ho's death count had started at the time he accepted Paul's challenge. She was sure this time that the purpose of the match from the start was an execution of Hwang Kwang-ho, and this would happen in 10 days. The next few days, Si-yeon was still thinking about the coming match of Kwang-ho. She was expecting that the crowd would surely insult Kwang-ho and no one would be on his side except her. She also imagined that Kwang-ho would have a hard time fighting. In addition, she believes that Kwang-ho's current hype is just temporary, and if he loses his match, not only would he lose the attention he's garnered, so she concludes this match would really be the end of Hwang Kwang-ho. Imagining the match makes her so devastated, and now she was hoping that the match would be cancelled. There are only 6 days left till D-Day. Si-yeon was planning on finding a way to halt the match during that day or to terminate the contract. She decides to hold a press conference, but after she comes out from her office, she sees a bunch of people surrounding Kwang-ho. Si-yeon was shocked since she expected no one. These people were attacking Kwang-ho by words. One of these people was annoyed by the fact that Kwang-ho said he didn't have a plan to do training. But then there's a video already leaked that he was preparing for his coming match. Kwang-ho is a despicable man who doesn't keep his word, folks. He added, and Kwang-ho behind him answered, "Being despicable is my specialty." Most of the people around him were taking videos and photos. The man in front of him ordered him to at least apologize for what he had done, but then Kwang-ho only said to him that he was trolling. He also made a peace sign and then said sorry, which made the people feel insulted and wanted to punch his face. Si-yeon was sweating and was mad. What are you all doing? Who are you to barge into someone else's office?" she angrily said. The people then asked who she was and thought that she might be Kwang-ho's secretary. She then grabbed the man's arm and informed them all that she was the president of this company. She ordered them to leave, but the man said that they got permission to be here. One lady then informed her that they were all invited by Hwang Kwang-ho for an interview. Si-yeon was confused, while the people at the same time wondered why she didn't know if she was the president. The lady also added that it was not just them who came, but also people from the broadcasting station and already left earlier. Si-yeon then asked about what interview they were doing, and they answered that it was all about Kwang-ho's match against Paul Ronne. After they left, Si-yeon came out from the building and checked the large screen outside. The DK League has been posted on the screen, so most people might know about it. Kwang-ho was doing his training on the ring inside the building of Si-yeon. Si-yeon came and commanded him to stop the training. She went back to her office and Kwang-ho then sat in front of her. "So, what do you have to say?" Kwang-ho asked while putting his 2 legs on the table. "Why are you doing that?" Si-yeon asked, and Kwang-ho believed that Si-yeon was referring to his training. He was massaging his neck using a massage gun while reminding the lady that there were only 6 days left until the math, so he told the lady to speak up and state her business quickly, then buzz off. Si-yeon was annoyed and grabbed Kwang-ho's wrist, causing the message gun to point at her, telling him that they couldn't continue like this. Kwang-ho was confused and asked him what he meant to say. "I know you've been treating me like a scarecrow, and I could have tolerated if the results had been good. But what's the current outcome? We've reached a point of no return." Si-yeon replied, and she also told Kwang-ho that she could not let his impulsive actions slide anymore. Kwang-ho disagreed with her and told her that there was no need to fix anything. Si-yeon angrily warned him that this match against Paul was set up and they were just trying to use them. In addition, the opponent is one of the top-level fighters in the DK League, so she believes no one would put such a fighter in an exhibition match, especially against a non-ability user like Hwang Kwang Ho. Kwang Ho asked her what's her point. Si-yeon was so down, and in the end, she told Kwang Ho that they must win. This match, we absolutely have to win, whether your opponent is Paul Ronne or someone else, you Hwang Kwang Ho must win. We've already come too far to fix it. There's no other way except for us to win, she stated. And Kwang Ho only replied, "Is that so?" Si-yeon sat down and realized that the gun she was holding that she got from Kwang Ho was only a message gun. She then asked Kwang Ho if he really had no plans. She wants Kwang Ho to share his plans with her since he's the one who said they were in the same boat. Kwang Ho stood and said that he would now share his plan. Si-yeon was annoyed, knowing that Kwang Ho had a plan after all, but took many days before sharing it with her. But then, as per Kwang Ho, his plan is to lose against Paul Ronne. Si-yeon was so puzzled, and according to Kwang Ho, he had been preparing and thinking for 10 days about how he could beat Paul Ronne when he looked like he was over 120 kilograms. If Paul Ronne had given him some more time, he could have figured out something somehow. Si-yeon was confused and asked why he still accepted the match if he was aware of Paul Ronne's strength. "Should I have declined? Do you think they would have just let it go if I had refused?" Kwang Ho answered. He concludes that those people would have accused him of dodging the match. He went behind Si-yeon and whispered something to her. Si-yeon then looked at him and got the idea of what Hwang Kwang Ho was really planning. 6 days later, the match was about to begin. According to the commentators, this is a match that would normally be impossible, a match between an ability and a non-ability user. That's why it will proceed as an exhibition match. Also, an additional reason that makes today's match stand out and become a hot topic recently. Si-yeon at this moment was nervous about the match. Hwang Kwang Ho then entered the ring where Paul Ronne was waiting. He was smiling at Kwang Ho, and also Kwang Ho smirked at him while informing him that he had been training a bit. The commenters questioned if Kwang Ho could take responsibility for all of his provocation. Si-yeon was staring at the ring with worries in her eyes. She recalled their conversation 6 days ago, and she told Kwang Ho that his plan of losing is nonsense. And she believes that if it would happen, there's going to be a massive public backlash. Kwang Ho then said that it is good if it happens. Si-yeon was so upset and hopeless and even regretted trusting Kwang Ho too much. Kwang Ho becomes silent for a moment, then suddenly asked Si-yeon if she have never met an asshole in her life. Si-yeon then replied that the asshole was right in front of her. "Don't you want to see it then?" Kwang Ho asked, and Si-yeon asked what it was. Kwang Ho then clenched her fist and answered, "That asshole getting beaten up." He believes that people usually forget what they like, but never forget what they hate. At the present time, the referee then asked both participants to prepare for the battle. He raised his arm, then swung it down and declared that the fight should now begin. Surprisingly, Kwang Ho punched Paul Ronne's face instantly. Paul's eyes were bleeding and also Kwang Ho's finger. Since Paul Ronne makes him hate him so much, he will never forget it. He charged to Paul Ronne and punched him several times. He easily beats up the bald man, which causes everyone to be speechless. Kwang Ho already expected that they might lose the match due to disqualification, but it doesn't matter to him now. At this point, Si-yeon chooses to close her eyes since she is aware of what Kwang Ho would try to do. She didn't witness how Hwang Kwang Ho easily beat up Paul Ronne despite that it was a foul play. Kwang Ho felt so good and satisfied after helplessly beating up Paul. The crowd was screaming in anger, knowing that Kwang Ho had done something wrong. Si-yeon heard the people's voices who were all in favor of Paul. While the crowd was screaming, Si-yeon was sick of listening to them. At the same time, the referee was speechless. Kwang Ho didn't regret what he had done. He was staring at the referee, which makes the referee terrified. Kwang Ho extended his arm and was trying to reach the referee's eye. The referee at the same time informed him that he committed a foul. Kwang Ho slowly reaches the referee's eye with his index finger, but before he can touch it, the referee dodges away and asks him what he is doing. Kwang Ho then said that he should be disqualified for committing a foul. Bouncers came to the ring and pushed his face to the ground. They slammed Kwang Ho's face and body on the ground, stopping him from moving. "Don't hold back and just cleanly end the match," Kwang Ho uttered with a smile on his face. But then he was shocked upon hearing Paul Ronne's voice, refusing to end the match. Paul Ronne doesn't want to end the match without hitting Kwang Ho. He got a black eye, and he said that Kwang Ho didn't commit a crime, and he only wants to call it an accident. Even in the DK League, fouls exist. Eye gouging, soccer kick, and stomping. That's why when the player gets disqualification through foul play is equally debuting as a villain. Turns the crisis of execution into an opportunity to gain the attention of the public. "If you've played something shitty, you should pay for it, right?" Kwang Ho uttered. An outrageous but brilliant idea. Though the risk was high, there was no other option. But Si-yeon wondered why the match didn't stop. Both Kwang Ho and Paul Ronne prepare for battle. As expected, were cheering for Paul, and they all wanted Paul to smash Kwang Ho. Ironically, Kwang Ho's foul ended up making the execution even more enthralling. Paul Ronne was attacking him, and he keeps on dodging. The attacks from Paul even drive him nuts. He jumped away and ran. The diameter of the octagon is 11.5 meters. Unlike a boxing ring, with its octagonal structure, there are no corners. In other words, it's ideal for running away. As he was running, he heard Paul Ronne calling him a coward for running. As he glimpses a little behind him and sees Paul's fist heading toward him, but he luckily manages to avoid it. "How long are you going to keep running away?" Paul asked. He spun his elbow and hit Paul Ronne's face. "Good, it landed," he uttered, and Paul Ronne smiled at him and responded, "That's more like it. Ready to fight now, are we?" He then jumped and clenched his fist, then punched Kwang Ho's face, but Kwang Ho was able to block it using his arm. Still, Paul Ronne's punch was too strong, causing him to slide away. Paul Ronne then punched him once more, and this time he flew away. Because of it, the crowd was so noisy and laughed at him, calling him an idiot. One of the commentators then said that fighter Kwang Ho seemed to be under some sort of delusion and forgot that it wasn't some mixed martial arts match. The other commentator also added that the purpose of a guard is to block attacks, but against Paul Ronne, they believe a guard is meaningless, or perhaps they came to this match without even preparing a countermeasure for this ability. At this moment, the referee was focusing on the match, not until he heard Si-yeon calling him, asking him why the match was still ongoing when Paul Ronne also committed a foul. But then the referee looked away. Si-yeon then realizes that she had forgotten an important fact, that this place is the home ground of the DK League. She knows that the DK League decides the validity of a disqualification, and also the audience is no different. In fact, no one sees anything wrong with this situation. From the start, everyone was biased. The people gathered here are just fans of the DK League's black Paul Ronne, who wants to watch him take on the former MMA champion Kwang Ho. They gathered here because they wanted to see their idol toy with their opponent. Kwang Ho's blood dripped on the ground, but he was still bravely standing in front of Paul, while saying that he didn't envy the guy he fought last time, but now envy Paul Ronne. "Must be nice having such a convenient ability, huh?" Kwang Ho said. Si-yeon was staring at him and was hoping that he would pull himself together, knowing that it would now be dangerous for him. Si-yeon was thinking that she should consider forfeiting if disqualification isn't an option. But in the first match that Kwang Ho garnered everyone's attention, if they were to forfeit, she believes it would be the end of their team. She was now confused since she also didn't want it to happen, and she concluded that there should be a way to overcome this situation. A way to get through this without forfeiting. She was thinking of another way to overcome this situation, a way without forfeiting. She was looking at the ring with her hands on her face since she was afraid Kwang Ho would be beaten up to death. All of a sudden, Paul Ronne suddenly lay on the ground, so Kwang Ho asked him what he was doing. "What am I doing?" you ask. "Naturally, I'm waiting for the first round to end." Paul Ronne answered. Kwang Ho was still confused, and Paul said that this event was a big event everyone's been waiting for. Kwang Ho was speechless and saw the people laughing so loud as if they were insulting Kwang Ho. "If I end this off easily, wouldn't it be just boring?" Paul Ronne stated, and Kwang Ho remained silent. A ring girl then came to the ring with the number 2 tarp as a sign that the second match would begin in a few. Si-yeon also gets inside the ring to assist Kwang Ho. She asked Kwang Ho if he was still fine, but Kwang Ho didn't respond. She thought Kwang Ho didn't hear her, but then Kwang Ho spoke and said that he just bled a little and had no serious problem. Si-yeon then handed him water. Kwang Ho then opened the bottle and informed Si-yeon that Paul was holding back his strength, just enough to disrupt the match. Si-yeon then concludes that it is called self-control, and Kwang Ho answers yes. As she was staring at Kwang Ho, she felt pity for him. She called Kwang Ho's name and suggested to him that they must forfeit the match. But then, as per Kwang Ho, they cannot just forfeit. Si-yeon then said that she knows it too, but for her, she believes she doesn't have any other choice right now. It was also very obvious to her that they'd only get ridiculed if they continued and would only end up being exploited more. "Just a short while ago, I was feeling the same. I understand it well. You probably don't want to admit your judgment was wrong. But the sooner you acknowledge it, the wiser it is to mitigate the risks. So let's just forfeit this time," Si-yeon stated. And Kwang Ho was speechless. At this moment, there are only 20 seconds left before the second round starts. Kwang Ho then stood and said that he would still do the match. He then walks away from Si-yeon while Si-yeon is still asking him to forfeit. But then Kwang Ho said that he really doesn't have any plans of forfeiting the game. Si-yeon was mad, asking him what he was planning to do. "What do you mean, what am I going to do?" Kwang Ho responded. The crowd was laughing, seeing Kwang Ho still eager to fight. They belittled him, knowing that he was a guy without any ability. And they even said that Kwang Ho was being delusional for expecting to win this match against Paul Ronne. For them, Hwang Kwang Ho is just nothing but hype with zero skills, and they also accused him of stealing the champion title. "Let's have a match. I'll beat you up to pulp," one man screamed. While they were making Kwang Ho a laughingstock, Kwang Ho was furious listening to them, and he vowed to make these people regret insulting him. To participate in the DK League, the manifestation of one's abilities is a necessity. And after the manifestation, they are eligible to participate in the Amateur League. After that, they must win a match and obtain a pro card to proceed further. Then they will earn the right to participate in the lower league of the DK League, where they need to win again in the lower Pro League and collect points through victories. Even among those chosen, only the elite among the elite can reach this level. That's why they are the object of reverence and represent those ability users, their pride. However, abilities were just an addition. At this moment, Paul Ronne is ready to fight. Kwang Ho in front of him is warming up, and Paul insulted him by saying that he's now ready to take a beating. Kwang Ho's face is emotionless, which makes Paul think that he is sad since he isn't popular and no one is in favor of his side. Kwang Ho then smirked and said that he had been thinking while he was resting. The system has always existed, and the one who stands at the apex of that system are the champions, as they say. The champion who has reached the pinnacle has reached the realm beyond humans by creating techniques honed by defeating the ability users. Just like what Kwang Ho did this time, he kicked Paul Ronne using a 0.6-second high kick. Paul Ronne flew away and slammed into the ground. The crowd, who were very noisy belittling Kwang Ho a while ago, were now very silent. Si-yeon was also surprised, and even the commentators were dumbfounded. Paul Ronne slammed his huge hand on the ground, and his eyes were rounded as he questioned Kwang Ho how he managed to make it. He believes that it isn't an ability, but a technique. He screamed, ordering Kwang Ho to show it again, and Kwang Ho obeyed him and hit his injured eye. The commentators then declared foul, and the moment Kwang Ho heard them, he then looked at them and said that it wasn't foul but an accident. The crowd doesn't know how to react, knowing that what he said is Paul Ronne's word in the first round. Kwang Ho then hits Paul Ronne multiple times, and he is like an evil person while repeatedly screaming that it was an accident. The referee didn't interfere. He clearly saw Paul Ronne's face being beaten up. He doesn't have the energy, as he proclaimed that Kwang Ho committed a foul again. Still, Kwang Ho said it was just an accident despite that he had done it numerous times. The referee was too afraid to stop Kwang Ho. The crowd at the same time was full of anger against Kwang Ho. This time, they were protesting, commanding Kwang Ho to stop beating up Paul Ronne and not disgrace the DK League. "You guys really confuse me. It was an accident before," Kwang Ho replied while looking at the crowd. But the people still screamed at him to stop, and even called him psycho and incompetent. Kwang Ho looked at them with an emotionless face, then raised his middle finger to them. The people felt insulted and were mad at him. Kwang Ho then told them that they were the people who questioned his professional qualifications and would now turn the match invalid since things weren't going their way. He concludes that these people were playing with their own rules. At this moment, Paul Ronne suddenly spoke behind him, asking him why he didn't finish the match, or why he didn't knock him out if he wanted to. "Whether it's foul or cheating, it doesn't matter, it's your win, since I'm the one who changes the rules after all." Paul Ronne added, he believes that there is a reason why Kwang Ho didn't finish the match. Kwang Ho was staring at him and was puzzled. The commentators and audiences were waiting for what would happen next. Unfortunately, Paul Ronne used his ability and charged at Kwang Ho at a fast speed. He claims that Kwang Ho is greedy for not knocking him out. He also believes that Kwang Ho didn't want to win like this, but wanted to beat him at his full strength. He extended his arms and declared that he would now show to Kwang Ho the Terminus. "I was wondering what you were blabbering about. Too full of yourself, aren't ya? I really couldn't care less about your abilities," Kwang Ho replied. He squeezes his shoulder while smiling. On the other hand, Paul Ronne was listening to him. He then said that the reason why he didn't finish the match was because it would have been too boring if he just ended this off easily. "I'm still having a blast, why would I stop now?" he uttered. After conversing, the ring girl went inside the ring to show the signal of the coming third round. In non-championship matches, the third round is the final one, meaning this round will determine the winner. Both Kwang Ho and Paul Ronne were preparing for the third round. Si-yeon called Kwang Ho's name, so Kwang Ho glanced at her. Si-yeon was silent, so Kwang Ho looked away at him as he thought Si-yeon would say nothing. Si-yeon's head was down, and she was stuttering while she tried to wish some good luck for Kwang Ho. Kwang Ho looked at her back, and she now screamed, cheering him to fight and go for the win. Kwang Ho was surprised to hear the lady cheering for him. He only thought that Si-yeon was about to go into preacher mode again. But the fact is that there were a lot of words Si-yeon wanted to say to Kwang Ho, like the fouls were too much, asking him why he didn't finish the match, or why he just took hits in the first round, and more. But she chose not to say any of it since she believed it didn't matter now. "Fighting? Go for it, H1 Kwang Ho. Let's show those who ignored us," she screamed once again, which was heard by the audiences. Everything doesn't matter to her now. What's more important for her is to know exactly Kwang Ho's plan. She continuously cheered Kwang Ho, and Kwang Ho smiled at her and replied okay. He glanced back to his opponent, who was now extending his hand. "We didn't greet each other yet, did we?" Paul said. Kwang Ho then concludes that Paul Ronne only wanted to shake hands with him to break his arm. Paul then responded that it was just to show mutual respect. Kwang Ho chuckled and agreed to Paul Ronne. They both shake hands and then position themselves and hear the referee declare that round 3 has now finally begun. At the same time, Paul Ronne bumped his fists and stated that it was time to end this match since they already got the formalities out of the way. Kwang Ho was puzzled and seemed like he was out of his mind, but clearly heard the commenters saying that Paul Ronne's ability is based on vibration. He also heard Si-yeon outside the ring, screaming at him, begging him to come to his senses. She said this knowing that among Paul Ronne's vibrations can numb his opponent's senses. From the other's point of view, another bald man was watching Paul Ronne and Hwang Kwang Ho's match in the live broadcasting. A non-ability user doing their best against a DK League's black member, isn't it amazing? He uttered, and his subordinate beside him, who also looked hypnotized or something, replied that Kwang Ho was still useless in the end. He was staring only at Kwang Ho, believing that Kwang Ho was already his limit. At this moment, Kwang Ho sees no one. According to the commentators, he is now facing the Terminus. He was looking at his hands as he felt that it was numb, but then as he was moving it, he confirmed that he still had a sense of touch. Paul Ronne was already behind him. Paul Ronne grips Hwang Kwang Ho's neck while pushing him away. Kwang Ho grabbed Paul Ronne's arm, but then Paul Ronne was able to slam him onto the ground. Just at this level, well, I'll manage somehow. Is this the end? Kwang Ho asked with a smile on his face. Paul Ronne also smiled at him and tried to punch him using his arm that was held by Kwang Ho. Kwang Ho was trying to stop Paul Ronne from hitting him. Both of his legs wrapped up Paul's body. He was struggling and Paul slammed him on the ground for the second time. Fortunately, Kwang Ho was able to kick Paul Ronne's face, but then Paul Ronne wasn't affected at all and still managed to throw Kwang Ho above. Kwang Ho was still looking at Paul Ronne, who was now bumping his fists while waiting for him to drop. The moment he almost dropped to the ground, Paul Ronne then punched him hard on his stomach. Kwang Ho was now in pain and he flew away on the corner. "How does it feel good to be betrayed by your senses?" Paul Ronne said. Kwang Ho was not moving. Paul Ronne was waiting for a response from him, but he didn't say any words, so Paul Ronne called the referee and gave a command to announce the victor. He walked away and looked back to Kwang Ho, teasing him that he was betrayed by his own senses. Kwang Ho slowly stood and understood what really happened. Paul Ronne laughed and repeatedly told Kwang Ho that he was really betrayed. He explains to Kwang Ho that the senses of someone would realize who was stronger once they experience his ability. He confidently, "That's why they betrayed their weaker owner and started obeying me." At this point, Kwang Ho wrapped his arms around Paul Ronne's neck. He was about to bump his face into Paul Ronne's face, but before he made it, Paul Ronne punched his face, causing him to drop on the ground. It's a pity, but the moment I used Terminus, the game was already over. Vision, touch, hearing, it's just a matter of time before more and more of your senses start obeying me. Even though I don't particularly enjoy winning like this, but it's not like I can lose either to such weak opponents, right? Paul Ronne confidently said. He also told Kwang Ho to take pride in the fact that he made him use Terminus. He raised one arm and was about to swear something, but before he could complete his sentence, Kwang Ho strongly kicked his chin. Senses? How dare this son of a bitch betray its master? I'll have to beat some sense into it. Kwang Ho replied while punching his own cheek. 3 days ago, Hwang Kwang Ho used the message gun while talking to Si-yeon. That time, Si-yeon asked why he was doing a training if he said he had a sure shot to get disqualified. She also complains that she cannot focus on her work because of the loud coming from the message gun. Kwang Ho then only said that it felt good. During that time, Si-yeon decided to let Kwang Ho do what he was doing and believed that the massage gun might also be his sort of training. At this time, she recalled that scenario. She was standing behind Kwang Ho, who was now confidently saying that smacking himself is the medicine to Paul's Terminus, which is now very clear as day for him. Upon hearing it, Si-yeon confirmed that the massage gun was really Kwang Ho's self-training to face Paul Ronne. After witnessing how Kwang Ho cracked Paul Ronne's ability, commentators were shocked and wondered how Kwang Ho managed to do it. The other commentator then concludes that it might be because of the shock to the head of Kwang Ho, unintentionally cracking the abilities delivered by Paul Ronne to his brain. They cannot believe that Kwang Ho would directly apply a shock to his own brain unless he is crazy. "Are you crazy, aren't you?" Paul Ronne asked. According to him, no regular shocks would work for his Terminus, as it is not something a sane person would even try. And he believes Kwang Ho can only do it once or twice at most. Kwang Ho tried to punch him once more, but Paul blocked it with his arms and dodged. Kwang Ho smiled at him and responded that he could make it more than enough. He then charged at Paul Ronne, then punched him in the face. Light hits just need to be endured, while big moves can be blocked. Compared to that, there's no locking an opponent's strikes. The chosen submission turned out to be useless. So, what's left is a technique that's reached a superhuman level. At this moment, Kwang Ho was already aware of whether it was one ability or two. The only advantage here is technique. He stopped hitting Paul Ronne and said that he had a suggestion. Paul Ronne then permitted him to say it, and he then reminded Paul that there was not much time left for the third round, so instead of wasting it, he wanted them both to wrap the match up quickly. But then Paul Ronne doesn't get Kwang Ho's point. It turned out that Kwang Ho only wanted Paul to lower his guard down and give that Terminus another go. Kwang Ho's real plan this time is to fight the Terminus of Paul with technique. He repeated his suggestion to Paul Ronne and informed him that he would only use his kick, a killer move to killer moves. Paul Ronne asked him why he would agree to his suggestion. Kwang Ho then concludes that Paul Ronne is now scared of his high kicks. Paul Ronne laughed, but even if he didn't give any response, Kwang Ho tried to kick him. If Kwang Ho cannot win using the technique he has, then he must fight with what he doesn't have. Since Kwang Ho lacks the pride that a fighter should have, he attacks in the middle of the conversation, aiming for Paul Ronne's injured right eye. From a blind spot that can't be seen, he tricked Paul Ronne into thinking it's a high kick, changing the kick trajectory midway. It is such a lowest trash way to fight, but it is the main reason why it would work now for Kwang Ho against Paul. Judgment gets fuzzy when things get complicated. And when things get fuzzy, people have fuzzy judgment than usual. And a chance created by unpredictability, if coincidence happens twice, it becomes an inevitability. And when happens thrice, it becomes destiny. Turning chance into inevitability, inevitability into destiny, that is how victory carves out. Si-Yeon feels pity seeing Kwang Ho beaten up by Paul Ronne. The commentators at the same time then commanded the medical team to get into the octagon. Two men then headed to the ring and headed to Kwang Ho to treat his wound. But then Paul Ronne ordered them to stop. "Who says you can step into the octagon?" he asked, and the medical team then informed him the match had already ended since Kwang Ho's injuries were severe and needed treatment. Paul Ronne agreed that Kwang Ho's injuries were severe. At this time, Kwang Ho was bleeding much, but he still managed to stand. The commentators were surprised and questioned how Kwang Ho withstand Paul Ronne's attack. They even got to the point that Kwang Ho might also be an ability user. They then stood as they noticed something. And that is Paul Ronne didn't use his ability. He punched Kwang Ho's face, and the same as Kwang Ho to him. Both fighters are leaving themselves unguarded. The commentators declared that there is only 20 seconds remaining before the match would end. They also added that both fighters must have sustained considerable damage, and whoever can withstand this wild bout seems likely to claim victory. Si-Yeon was focusing on the match, but she was confused about what was happening. Kwang Ho received a punch from Paul Ronne, but he bent down and also punched back. Paul Ronne fell to the ground, and there were only 10 seconds left. Kwang Ho continuously punched Paul, but Paul managed to catch him and wrap his body. In 8 seconds, both were trying to push each other away. They were staring at each other's eyes, and it's only 2 seconds remaining. They managed to let go of each other and then grabbed each other's nape. 0 time left, and they were still in the same position. And the match ended with both of them punched each other's face. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you wish to have another part of this recap, please give us at least 2,000 likes. Please don't forget to comment and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Until next time.